200 miles south of Columbus and Teels Marsh lay the Amargosa Valley. It means bitter water of the desert and refers to the Amargosa River, which flows the length of the valley, underground, sometimes coming to the surface in streams and springs. In 1881, at one of the springs of the Amargosa, called Ash Meadows, in a humble mud hut carved out of the clay hillside, lived Aaron Winters and his new wife, Rosie. A visitor described it as a single room about 15 feet square. There was a bed, and at the foot of it, some shelves for dishes, 2 rocking chairs and sugar, coffee, and tea that were kept under the bed. And there was Rosie, a delicate Spanish-American woman with frail health and little fitted for life in the desert. In this humble existence, they waited for the day when Aaron would make his fortune by discovering silver or gold. One day, a prospector named Harry Spiller, traveling down from northern Nevada, was in search of a place to rest. He stopped and asked Aaron and Rosie if he could spend the night. They agreed, and in return for their hospitality, Harry told them of the great borax deposits and the fortunes that could be made. Because of the efforts of Smith and Coleman, borax had many industrial uses, but was also considered essential in the home. The 1883 Grocer's Companion Handbook proclaimed, "The important practical uses to which borax is put are almost innumerable." Aaron and Rosie knew the value of the mineral and listened as Spiller showed them how to test a suspected white rock for the presence of borax. He told them to add alcohol and sulfuric acid to the salty substance and light the mixture. If the flame was green, it contained borax. The next day, Spiller was on his way and Aaron was full of excitement. He remembered a likely-looking spot where borax might be found. He and Rosie headed off to a salty, dry lake bed in a long, narrow valley to the west. It was called Death Valley. It got its name back in 1849 from some pioneers heading west for the gold rush. These 49ers had taken a shortcut and stumbled into the deepest, driest, hottest valley in the Western Hemisphere. Because of their suffering and the death of one of their party, they named it Death Valley. But despite of, or perhaps because of, its notorious name and reputation, prospectors still roamed its canyons searching for riches. Aaron and Rosie arrived at Furnace Creek Wash at the mouth of the Great Valley and made camp. Before dark, Aaron went down to the marsh to scoop up some of the salt. According to one account, Aaron was excited, talking all the while, teetering and wobbling about. When he returned to camp, they waited for evening to perform the test. Aaron crushed the salty rock and added the alcohol and sulfuric acid in the pan. He lit the mixture. Then he shouted, "She burns green, Rosie! By God, we're rich!" Aaron had discovered Death Valley's borax. They went home and sent word to America's borax kings, Francis Marion Smith and William Tell Coleman. When word reached Coleman and Smith that borax was discovered in Death Valley, they sent representatives to meet Aaron and Rosie. At their little hut around a campfire, the negotiations began. Rosie got a bag of pine nuts, and she and Aaron struck the deal while cracking and eating them around the fire. Coleman decided this was his chance to not only distribute borax, but to become a producer as well. He bought Aaron's Death Valley claims for $20,000 and purchased other claims in the Amargosa Valley for $5,000. With his newfound money, Aaron set up a company and he and Rosie were indeed rich, but not for long. Aaron bought Charles Bennett's huge Pahrump Ranch for $20,000, but Rosie never had a chance to enjoy it. Their neighbors were the Yount family at the nearby Mance Ranch. Years later, one of the Younts recalled that Aaron brought Rosie to the ranch one day as she was very ill. She died a short time later. Aaron was now alone and couldn't make the ranch pay. He lost it all to back taxes and spent the rest of his days as a hermit in the mountains. Coleman was ready to set up his borax operation in America's most feared, desolate, and remote desert. To overcome Death Valley's obstacles, he needed the best in the business. He hired John William Sampson Perry, a former druggist from San Francisco with a keen sense of business and knowledge of chemistry, as foreman, and 45-year-old Swiss immigrant Rudolf Neuschwander, who had worked in the Nevada borax fields since the early 1870s. Neuschwander had overseen the operations at Fish Lake Valley, Columbus Marsh, and Teels Marsh for Smith. In the winter of 1882, the two men arrived at the site to set up Coleman's Harmony Borax Works. Neuschwander would model both Harmony and the Amargosa Works after Smith's earlier operations. In the sandy Teels Marsh, Neuschwander found a high mound on which to place the giant boiling tanks. They were encased in watertight wood. The system used gravity to take the purified solution with borax down to the vats where it crystallized on rods and on the sides of the tanks. At the Death Valley site, Neuschwander found a natural hillside to set up the gravity-based operation, and here he made an adobe structure for the works. The small settlement was called Coleman, and the operation itself was called the Harmony Borax Works. Equipment was brought in by train to Daggett, then hauled over 150 miles by mules and wagons into Death Valley. They brought in 2 enormous 3,000-gallon dissolving tanks, 8 2,000-gallon settling tanks, and 57 1,800-gallon crystallizing tanks. Coleman also established Greenland Ranch, just south of Harmony. An irrigation ditch brought water from Furnace Creek for the melon, sweet potato, vegetable gardens, and fruit trees. Soon, 40 acres of alfalfa hay was ready for harvest before any borax was produced. Workers were recruited to come to the valley named Death. Several men took one look at the place and quit. Coleman fired off a letter to a merchant in Daggett who was helping to find laborers. "I would reject offers of men of whom there is not reasonable assurance that they are good men, men who will stick. I want nothing to do with tramps. Now tell them that they will be required to do any kind of work, and that they will be sent to Death Valley where they must expect hot weather, and that everything is in a state of preparation. Now, on the road out to Death Valley, transportation will be furnished, but they will be required to walk whenever the head teamster requires it, and they will be subject to his orders in everything. Now, their wages will not commence until they are put to work at the works. Their wages will be $50 a month." Amidst all the men arriving in Death Valley, there was one woman. She was Alice Perry, the wife of foreman J.W.S. Perry. The couple had been married in December of 1882, and she vowed to follow him wherever he went, even to Death Valley. The train ride from San Francisco to the little desert town of Daggett seemed terribly slow. To the woman from California's coastal redwood country, the Mojave Desert was more desolate than she ever imagined. From Daggett, 2 light wagons carried the Perrys and their household goods more than 100 miles over dusty desert tracks to Coleman's Borax Works. It was to Alice the end of nowhere. But the men greeted her warmly, invited her to eat with them, and during her stay often brought presents back from their trips to Daggett and Mojave.
Not once did I ever hear a rough word at the dining table. They were gentlemen.